Hello and welcome to the Discover Reading podcast. Today we welcome our guest and former MA International Security Studies student, Mustafa, to speak to us about Afghanistan. Mustafa has recently left his home country and has relocated to Canada, where he is starting a new life. He gave us an insight into Afghanistan's present and conflicted past history and spoke very passionately about the need to help support its people to ensure it has a brighter future despite the present stark reality. Brilliant. It's so good to have you on the show, Mustafa. Obviously, we met a few years ago when you were doing your Masters at Reading, so I haven't seen you for a few years. So first of all, thanks a lot for coming on. We'll dive straight into our first question, really, is to just tell the listeners who you are and what's brought you to where you are today.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's a pleasure to see you after a few years, and thank you for inviting me. I'm a war survivor who was born and grew up in war in Afghanistan. Since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, my country is in war, and our stories are always affected by war. But the war has not stopped me and millions of other Afghans to study and work for the betterment of our country. In the 1990s, as my family was moving from one place to another to survive from the ongoing war, I studied in different schools. After the new changes in 2001 and the formation of new government in Afghanistan, my family moved to Kabul and I resumed my studies. I completed my high school and then a BA degree in social science at Kabul University in 2013. During this time, I was also working at a private company to finance my studies and help my family. In early 2015, I started working at the office of the chief executive of the government of Afghanistan. But I always had the dream of studying abroad, mainly in the UK, because of its unique and high standards of education system. In September 2017, I started my MA degree in International Security Studies at the University of Reading. At Reading, I was involved in several student societies, and I was also selected as a student ambassador to help prospective students in their admissions journey. After completing my studies at Reading in September 2018, I returned to Kabul and continued working until the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban in August 2021. And in late August 2021, I left Afghanistan. And leaving Afghanistan means leaving behind everything: a professional career, friends, family, and home.
I was very curious. You mentioned Afghanistan in the 90s and then the 2000s. So you look quite young to me. You know, I'm only 28 myself, so my personal memories of the 90s are a little bit vague. But can you remember what Afghanistan was like in that period of the 90s and then also in the 2000s? What was it like growing up in Afghanistan in that period?
During the 90s, because after the Soviet invasion in 1979, there was a resistance against the Soviet invasion until the withdrawal of Soviet forces. The war continued, and then in 1990s, there was a civil war. So our lives was, I remember, like we were moving to different places to hide ourselves from the rockets that going up of our heads. Until the Taliban took the power in 1996, and then we again were moving because the war was going on. That was like a difficult time for the people of Afghanistan, the poverty, the security, everything. But in 2001, after the international engagement in Afghanistan, there was a window of hope for a better future, and the people thought the war is ended, and life started again in Afghanistan, and schools were open, there were jobs, people were starting their lives. And it was much better, and there were more opportunities for people, especially for the younger generation, especially for girls who were banned from schools in late 90s. Since 2001, I think things were going to the right direction.
Okay, and then you were saying, if you want, that you then had the opportunity to come to the UK. So again, we'd be quite curious, why Reading, and how did Reading help you in your future career direction after you completed the Masters?
University of Reading helped me to develop my skills, knowledge, create networks, and boost my confidence to be succeed in my career direction. The overall context of the program was an excellent opportunity to enhance my political knowledge with a global perspective. And all aspects of my time at Reading, including the teaching sessions, study trips, assignments, volunteer activities, discussions with visiting speakers from the world of politics, both British politicians and international politicians, were all impactful in my career direction.
And then we come to a period after you completed your Masters, in which we noted that you were working for the High Council for National Reconciliation of Afghanistan, of course, prior to the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. What was the High Council for the National Reconciliation? What was it, and what did it do?
The High Council for National Reconciliation of Afghanistan was leading all aspects of the Afghan peace process. The Council was leading the peace negotiations on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan with the Taliban, as well as building a national, regional, and international consensus on Afghan peace process. Dr. Abdullah, a well-known Afghan leader, was the head of the High Council. I was working as the director of Regional International Affairs Commission, which was formed to build and strengthen regional and international consensus, as well as promote further cooperation and coordination among Afghanistan's regional international partners in support of the peace process. The commission was led by the chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation and co-chaired by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of State for Peace, and the chief of the negotiation team. The Kabul-based ambassadors and heads of mission were attending the monthly meetings of the commission, and I was leading all the secretariat affairs, including setting agenda, arranging the meetings, making talking points, providing advice, and executing the meetings decisions in collaboration with other stakeholders, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of State for Peace of the Afghan government.
Okay, that's a fascinating job that you had, and it sounds quite challenging. What were the meetings like? Could they become quite heated? Were they very kind of amicable? What was your experience of that?
Because of the COVID, the meetings were held virtually, and mostly the Afghan side, like the High Council and the government of Afghanistan, were giving briefings on the recent progress in the peace process to our international partners in the meeting. And then after the briefings and information and latest progress of the peace process, our international partners, like the ambassadors and heads of missions, were delivering their speech in countries' position and recent developments towards the peace process.
Was that tricky doing it all virtually, or was that fine?
It was fine, although sometimes we all experience technical issues, which in those kind of events could be much difficult to manage. But yeah, it was fine until it ends. It was challenging. So every time you think if there's an issue, because that's a very high level meeting, and but in general, they went very well.
Yeah, I think we all had that, didn't we? Yeah, freezing screens, hands up, people speaking over each other. It's never easy. But I'm just curious because you were mentioning the council, and if you want, there's two sides of the council, if you want to describe it to me: the international side and then the Afghani side. Was the Afghani side, was the attempt there to have representation from across Afghanistan? And then just secondly, in terms of the international side, who was representing the international side? Was it just diplomats, or was it more wide than that?
In Afghanistan side, because the council included both the government, the parliament of Afghanistan, who were elected by the people of Afghanistan, and some well-known political leaders and political parties leaders of Afghanistan. They were all represented in the council in the High Council for National Reconciliation. And in the international part, all the key players who were involved in the Afghan peace process, Afghanistan neighbors, NATO countries, Europeans, and both regional and international countries who had diplomatic relations with Afghanistan and who had their offices in Kabul were a part of the meetings.
Okay, that's great. And now just thinking about the present day, could you tell us what the present situation in Afghanistan is, and how reliable is the information that we receive about the current situation, in your opinion?
To show part of the present situation in Afghanistan, I will just give a few recent examples. Afghanistan ranked last in the World Happiness Report among 149 countries surveyed. After August 2021, Afghanistan is propelled from humanitarian crisis to catastrophe, with millions of Afghans facing famine, and families are selling children and organs to survive. The uncertain future of girls' schools, freedom of speech, human rights, and several of other issues show the level of difficulties in Afghanistan. Although the world is focusing on other global challenges such as the war in Ukraine, but the people of Afghanistan needs an immediate and strong support to prevent further catastrophe.
Okay, so I guess this will be quite a tricky question, but one of the questions which Western governments were dealing with before the Ukraine crisis propped up, but it's still, despite Ukraine, extremely relevant now, is essentially, I guess there were things such as bank accounts which were in Afghanistan, which were frozen, the level of aid which should go inside Afghanistan. Should the West, whatever they might think about something such as the Taliban, reopen that? Because if those close down, then no funds are going into Afghanistan, and that's terrible for the Afghani people. Is that something which the West could look to do to alleviate the problems in Afghanistan? Let charities get in there, let aid get in there, let finances flow through, because that will help the people. Would I be correct in assuming a decision like that would actually help?
I think any ways that can help the people of Afghanistan, that can prevent a further catastrophe and a further crisis, is beneficial for the people of Afghanistan. In any ways that can support the people to tackle the issues of poverty and famine and so on is beneficial for the people of Afghanistan.
And then you were going to look at the bit of historical angle of this as well. So General McMaster, I was listening to him, I think it may have been on the Joe Rogan Experiences, but he was quite critical of the West in terms of the final 5 years, and his argument was essentially that politicians and publics in the West became too impatient with progress in Afghanistan. I suppose he was quite a realist in the way he thought about the world, and he was essentially saying that quite often, you know, people in the West assume that the entirety of Afghanistan could become united and become free of the Taliban, and that was unrealistic. But nonetheless, during those final 5 years, much of the country was making considerable progress, cities like Kabul, and so therefore it was a mistake to give that up, and that the limited, Western assistance the last 5 years was getting the country to move in the correct direction. Do you think he has a point?
There were multiple reasons for the slow progress in the reform process in Afghanistan, which require detailed research and discussions. But yeah, the West support was key. But over the years, the responsibilities were taken by Afghans themselves. For example, in 2014, NATO's international forces ended their combat mission, leaving responsibility for security to the Afghan forces. The remaining limited international forces were only providing technical support and advice. Afghanistan was progressively recovering and developing. A new educated generation was emerging, and the country was moving to the right direction. Despite serious challenges such as corruption, unemployment, and poverty, there was hope, there was motivation and support among the people to make Afghanistan a democratic and self-sufficient country. With a limited support, the country could continue its path to the right direction.
So in your opinion, if that support had carried on, that would have been definitely the best option, really?
Yes, because after 20 years, there was a strong support for the peace process in Afghanistan. There was a national consensus inside Afghanistan. There was a regional consensus and international consensus out of Afghanistan. And it was a unique opportunity to succeed the peace process and prevent the catastrophe. And that could happen with the continuation of the support.
Okay, interesting. And can I ask you a question about the geography of Afghanistan? And this will maybe kind of touch a little bit into, if you want, the cultural diversity and complexity of Afghanistan as well. So I think when McMaster was making those comments, he compared Afghanistan to Sweden. He made the point that in Sweden, everything is very much united around the centre. If you go from Stockholm to the north of Sweden, it's very similar in terms of the geography and culture. In Afghanistan, was, say, if you want, the attitudes towards women's education extremely different. Say, if you're going from Kabul to a valley in the southern cantons, was that a potential challenge, which was there were quite different opinions, say, if you were going from an urban populace to a countryside populace?
Yeah, there was difference between cities and rural areas of Afghanistan, but in some values, and there are a lot of stories and media as well, like, for example, women education. There are a lot of stories that because women education is not against Afghan values or Islamic values, there were a lot of support for women education. There were a lot of schools, but because of the ongoing war in some parts, there were no opportunities for women in some areas. Yes, I can say there is a difference always between cities and rural areas in every country. But in Afghanistan, because of the ongoing war since 1979 and lack of development projects, and because of the nature of Afghanistan, which is mostly a mountainous country and not much connected in the past, mainly, there were some differences. But for some key values like education, women education, there's still a broader support. Yes, Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic and multicultural country. It has two official languages, but a lot of people speak in different languages. They have different cultures. There are differences, but there are a lot of unifying points among the people and key values.
Okay, no, that's good to hear, because I think a lot of time people talk about Afghanistan of having these conflicting different parts of society, and that being such a big challenge of trying to unify so many different opinions. But you're saying that actually there is shared opinions and shared values across society in actual case?
Yeah, so I think diversity is not a weakness, it's a strength. So we say in a garden there are different flowers, so all of them has their own beauties. Afghanistan also had different differences, but if we all live in a peaceful country, we respect and accept each other values and opinions, which a democratic system can help us to have that kind of environment.
Absolutely, that's a really beautiful way of putting it. I like that. I think this links in a bit to our next question. Is I think we'd read somewhere that over half of the Afghani population were born after 2001. We don't know if that's completely correct, but there's this sense that Afghanistan is a nation with a very young populace. So is that a source for hope for the future, despite the Taliban takeover, that Afghanistan is a country with a lot of young people who perhaps have a different outlook on things, who are growing up now?
Yes, about 63% of Afghans are under 25 years of age. If the youth are provided with quality education, employment, good healthcare, and empowerment, the young populace is a source of hope and strength. But if the opposite, unfortunately, it can be Afghanistan's other biggest challenge.
Okay, interesting. And do you think, because you said, is it 63% of our population is 25 or under, which is incredible? I presume that must give the country quite a lot of vibrancy, because again, one of the good things often about young minds is the fact that, young minds are quite open to ideas, open to ways of doing things. Is that another reason why it's very important for the world not to forget the people of Afghanistan and keep finance and funds going through, because that really will help the country rebuild, because you've got a young populace there who maybe aren't, I want to close this correctly, but quite often, populaces can be a little bit trapped by ghosts of the past. But if you've got a younger populace, that is a less of an issue, just so long as opportunities there.
Yes, it's a potential asset. And if we provide them with quality education and other necessary skills and services, they could be impactful to change the country to the right direction. But considering the current situation, unfortunately, there are a lot of challenges with the younger generation, unemployment, and also after the recent changes, there are no proper reports on how the quality of education is now there. And also we had a lot of scholarships from our international partners like Fulbright from the US, Chevening from the UK. So I think they are suspended for now. So those opportunities are important for the people of Afghanistan, because the younger generation will benefit from that, and they will contribute in the future in some ways, and that will be an asset for them to be beneficial for their country in the future.
I see. In your opinion, would you say if there's more hope and prospects for the future for the younger generation in Afghanistan, then they're less likely to support the Taliban? Is that a logical statement?
The majority of Afghan people support some key values. For example, girls' education. The majority want girls to be educated. And if it's against some, it doesn't matter, like the people of Afghanistan support it. And the people of Afghanistan want peace, but also some key human values like freedom of speech, like women rights, and freedom of choice, and diversity, to accept each other, whoever we are, and respect each other. with this kind of situation, I think there will be more opportunities for the younger generation in the future.
Okay. And do you think the most important thing to do is to establish peace? Because one of the things that surprised me when I was doing my, I didn't necessarily surprise me, when I was doing my research on Afghanistan for my dissertation, was the Afghanistan which I was reading about in the 20th century, in the 1970s, was a very different place to the Afghanistan which you read about in the 1990s. And I think Thomas Barfield is still alive, but he was speaking, if you want, about how, for example, there wasn't, for example, something what you could call religious extremism really in Afghanistan in the 60s and 70s. It was much more of a general cultural thing, because he said that Afghanis generally believed that they were good Muslims and it was just a part of everyday life. But then because conflict came around, people were radicalized. Do you think if Afghanistan is able to secure, let's just say, 10, 20 years for peace, things such as any support for the Taliban will naturally drop? Because it's the war and it's the conflict, which is the thing which is driving things such as division, extremism. And if there can be peace, then like you said, all the other values such as opportunity, prosperity, free speech, they can well and truly flourish. But first of all, peace has to be established. Would that be a correct way of looking at it?
Yes, I think in a peaceful situation, which all has equal opportunities and rights, and there's justice, and there is no grievances among the people, the society can be developed to the right direction. You mentioned about early years of Afghanistan in 1970s, for example. After the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, because Afghanistan was invaded during the Cold War, which the rivalry between the West and the Soviet Union was very hot at that time, and it became another battleground for the Cold War rivalries. And we know all that Afghanistan became the battleground, and the fight continued there. And of course, war impacts people's behavior, and it impacts all aspects of one's life when there's war. So a peaceful situation for Afghanistan means that especially the younger generation will have the opportunity to explore their abilities, their capabilities, and be productive for their communities.
Okay, perfect. And I guess you're a good example, as many young Afghanis did have the opportunity to travel, work, and be educated in other countries. How important is it that we keep those opportunities going, or maybe we open up those opportunities again for Afghani students?
Yes, this is very important, and I believe providing opportunity for one person can have a huge impact on communities and also in the future. So continuation of providing studying opportunities abroad for Afghans and also inside Afghanistan is very important, and I believe education is the only source of change in Afghanistan, and quality education can help Afghanistan to become self-sufficient, to be peaceful, and to contribute to the development of Afghanistan.
Perfect. Hands on, Phil. If you've got a question, over to you.
Yeah, I think we'll move on to perhaps the last question now that we had for you, Mustafa. And obviously we've been talking about very serious things. Lots of yourself have experienced so much change in your life and upheaval. But we wanted to try and end it on a bit of more of a positive note and ask, in your opinion, as an Afghani, what are some surprising and interesting things about Afghanistan that you know from living there that perhaps we don't talk about, which might be a bit more kind of uplifting, and that perhaps we don't hear about in the West when it's more of a negative narrative?
Yeah, in short, Afghanistan is a beautiful country. It has a beautiful landscape, and it was a top destination for tourists during the peacetime. Afghans are peaceful, hospitable, open-minded, and hardworking people. Although the imposed wars since 1979 have negatively affected the country. And resilience, hope, and love of freedom are the key aspects of the Afghan people. Despite all the current difficulties, there are still hopes to bring Afghanistan to the right direction.
Okay, perfect. And just one really quick final question. As I'm a man who definitely likes my food, I'm always curious to ask people from different countries, are there any Afghani dishes, any Afghani foods which you would recommend in particular?
Yes, Afghanistan, as it's a diverse country with diverse cultures, it also have diversity of foods. And the popular Afghan foods are Kabuli palau and kebab and many other good foods that no one will be regretted to have a taste.
All right, lovely stuff. So I think that is probably brings us to the end of today's episode. So thank you very much, Phil, as well for hosting, and thank you so much, Mustafa, for coming here, sharing your story, sharing your experiences, and your perspective on the wonderful nation of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher and Phil, for having me. It was great to speaking with you.
Thanks, Mustafa. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was a much needed and informative conversation. Afghanistan is a proud nation, one of great beauty, history and culture, but one which has suffered the tragedy of war and broken promises for not just 1 year, but decades. Yet, with minds, bravery and the positivity of young people such as Mustafa, hope remains for Afghanis. And it is on societies and policymakers not to forget these fine people. We hope that you enjoyed the episode, and please do keep on liking and following. It is much appreciated, and we will catch you on the next one.